Imagine this, the year is 1974. In the streets of Lisbon, Portugal, a near-bloodless military coup, known as the Carnation Revolution, topples a decades-old authoritarian regime. Soldiers place carnations in the muzzles of their rifles, a symbol of peace. But the ripples of this revolution are about to crash like a tidal wave thousands of miles away, on the shores of Angola. For Angola, this moment in Portugal wasn't just a news headline. It was the starting pistol for a race towards a long-awaited, deeply desired, and incredibly complicated freedom. For centuries, Angola had been under Portuguese rule. It was one of the cornerstones of their colonial empire, rich in resources like oil, diamonds, and coffee. Generations of Angolans had lived and died under a system that exploited their land and their labor. But resistance was always simmering just beneath the surface. By the 1960s, that simmering pot had boiled over. Three major nationalist movements emerged, each with its own vision for a free Angola, each with its own base of support, and unfortunately, each with its own deep-seated rivalries. First, there was the MPLA, the People's Movement for the Liberation of Angola. They were largely urban-based, with Marxist-Leninist ideals, drawing support from intellectuals and the Mbundu people. They were backed by the Soviet Union and Cuba, who saw an opportunity to expand their influence in Africa during the Cold War. Then, you had the FNLA, the National Front for the Liberation of Angola. Based primarily in the north, they had strong ties to the Bakongo people and were supported by neighboring Zaire, now the Democratic Republic of Congo. Their primary international backer? The United States, which was determined to counter Soviet influence wherever it appeared. And finally, there was UNITA, the National Union for the Total Independence of Angola. Their power base was in the Central Highlands and the South, among the Mbundu people. Led by the charismatic but controversial Jonas Savimbi, UNITA also received support from the United States and, more covertly, from apartheid-era South Africa, which was deeply concerned about a Marxist government on its borders. These three groups had a common enemy, Portugal. They fought a long and brutal guerrilla war for over a decade. The conflict was a drain on Portugal's resources and morale, contributing significantly to the discontent that fueled the Carnation Revolution back home. When the new government in Lisbon announced its intention to grant independence to its colonies, it should have been a moment of pure triumph for Angola. The common enemy was gone. The dream of freedom was finally within reach. But instead of unity, the power vacuum created a vortex of ambition and mistrust. The ideological differences between the MPLA, FNLA, and UNITA were vast. The ethnic and regional loyalties were deeply entrenched. And the Cold War superpowers, the US and the USSR, saw Angola not just as a newly independent nation, but as a critical chessboard for their global power struggle. They poured weapons, money, and military advisors into their respective proxy factions. The dream of a peaceful transition was evaporating fast. In January 1975, the three leaders, Agostinho Neto of the MPLA, Holden Roberto of the FNLA, and Jonas Savimbi of UNITA, met in Alvar, Portugal. They signed the Alvar Agreement, a pact that laid out a roadmap to independence. It called for a transitional government with representatives from all three movements and a unified national army. It set the date for independence, November 11, 1975. On paper, it was a perfect solution. A government of national unity. A fresh start. But the ink on the agreement was barely dry before the fighting began. The transitional government was a disaster. The factions couldn't even agree on basic administrative tasks, let alone how to run a country. Skirmishes in the capital, Luanda, quickly escalated into open warfare. The dream of a unified army shattered as soldiers remained loyal to their original movements, turning their guns on their supposed comrades. Luanda, the jewel of the colony, became the primary battlefield. The MPLA, with its strong urban presence and a flood of Soviet and Cuban support, managed to secure control of the capital. This was a crucial victory. By holding Luanda, they held the seat of government and the country's main port. Meanwhile, the FNLA, backed by Zairean troops and American funds, launched a major offensive to try and take Luanda before Independence Day. Their march on the capital, however, was decisively crushed by the better organized MPLA forces, who were bolstered by a massive influx of Cuban soldiers. This defeat was a devastating blow to the FNLA, from which they would never fully recover as a major military force. In the south, UNITA, with support from South African forces, was also making its own moves. The battle lines were being drawn not just between Angolans, but between global ideologies. The United States and the Soviet Union were essentially fighting a war by proxy, using Angolan lives to score points in their geopolitical game. And so we arrive at November 11, 1975. The day that was supposed to be a celebration of freedom and unity. In Luanda, under the control of the MPLA, Agostinho Neto stood before a crowd and declared the independence of the People's Republic of Angola. The red and black flag, with a machete and a star, was raised. For the people in the capital, it was a moment of incredible pride and hope, the culmination of a 500-year struggle. But just a few hours earlier, in the city of Wambo, the heartland of UNITA, Jonas Savimbi had made his own declaration of independence. And in the north, the FNLA did the same. On its very first day as a free nation, Angola had not one, but three rival governments, each claiming to be the legitimate ruler. The Portuguese had simply packed up and left, handing over sovereignty to the Angolan people, without specifying which group that was. The colonial war was over. But a new, even more devastating conflict had just begun. The Angolan Civil War would rage for the next 27 years. It would become one of the longest and deadliest conflicts of the Cold War, tearing families apart, devastating the country's infrastructure, and costing more than 500,000 lives. The natural wealth of the nation, its oil and diamonds, became a curse, funding the war machines of the warring factions instead of building schools and hospitals. The story of Angola's independence in 1975 is a powerful and tragic lesson. It's a story of how a righteous struggle for freedom can be hijacked by internal rivalries and external interests. The joy of liberation was tragically and immediately overshadowed by the sorrow of civil war. The day Angola became free was also the day its long, painful journey through self-inflicted conflict truly began. The dream of 1975 took nearly 3 decades of bloodshed to even begin to be realized. It's a stark reminder that the end of one war is not always the beginning of peace. Thank you so much for watching. This is a complex chapter of history, and there's so much more to explore. If you found this video informative, please hit the like button and subscribe for more deep dives into pivotal moments in world history. Let us know in the comments what other topics you'd like to see covered. Until next time.